purpose of Freethought Forum is to be vigilant to the encroachment of religion into government and to educate the general public as to what a freethinker is.
My thoughts give me power.
No scholar can map them.
No hunter can trap them. No person can deny.
Hello and welcome to Freethought Forum. I'm Catherine Fahringer. You're the producer of this show and your host for today's program. Today we're going to talk about a rather sensitive subject. We're going to discuss the sexual abuse of children. And I was very fortunate. I have two women who work with formerly abused people, and I have a survivor of sexual abuse. So I want to welcome you all to the show, Deborah Fuselier and Weir and Maggie Hardy. I almost forgot. Well, close enough. I almost made it all the way through 3 names. That was pretty good. After 4 shows, yeah, it's really good. Well, thank you so much for coming, and I'm really sorry that it's taking you away from valuable things, but I do appreciate it, and I want you to know, and I want to say it on the air so that people will know I am duly appreciative for your presence today. And I thank you for staying, and Deborah, thank you for coming. It's wonderful. Now, I know that the sexual abuse has been going on, I'm sure, of children since time began, right. Probably, but this was not something that people talked about. There have been a lot of things. Would you say so? We're getting more news. Isn't that why it seems that there are more cases, or is it increasing too?
I think that because it's something that's come out of the closet, so to speak, if I can use that expression, and people are more open because we're in a society where there's an easy access to information. We hear about it more. I think that it probably has existed in as large a number for a very long time, the incident of it, but it was not something that families could talk about. It's not something that anyone was willing to hear, and so I think that it probably has always been there. I don't know that there's more sexual abuse happening in the 90s than there was in the 70s, 60s, 50s, or 40s, but it's something that it's
anyway, would there?
Newly okay to talk about.
The very word
limited, at least, in limited ways.
Not acceptance of talking about it, not acceptance of the crime.
No,
right.
Certainly not.
But it's okay to talk about a lot of things that we
used not to.
That's right.
Which is true. And there are a lot of things that they talk on regular programs, on big-time stuff about that I wish they wouldn't, really. I mean, there are some terrible things about these subjects that are social problems and tragedies should be talked about, and so that we can figure out why it happens and how we can address the problem.
Agreed. Catherine, I feel like a forum like you provide here is really advantageous to the public because it is a forum where there are trained professionals to talk about the subject, and rather than seeing a made-for-television movie where something is so sensationalized and sold as entertainment. And because that happens, I think the whole subject gets trivialized, and people think, oh, well, you didn't really have this happen to you. You just saw that on television. You're just looking for attention. And so it becomes trivialized rather than, looked at as an intelligent subject that people need to concern themselves with and become aware of, become more informed about.
I think, I was wondering, which came first, the business of the sexual abuse of children by priests? Was that something that catapulted this whole
I don't think so.
Or when did we start being so aware? I can't think. It seems to me that it was through the religious angle that I...
No, I don't think so. I think you'll agree with me. We've been working with the AMACs, as we call them, adults molested as children, for many, many years.
I don't mean priests invented it. I'm just saying that came to public attention. It was so startling. I thought maybe that was...
Perhaps that's what made everybody stop and take notice, because that
is pretty dramatic. Let's
face it.
It's very dramatic. Talk about betrayal of trust.
It really comes out in the open. Not only that, but there's a lot of legal money. There's a lot of money involved again. Suing the church. I mean, the Catholic Church is probably one of the wealthiest entities in the world. And so I think that's another reason that it's been really brought out there. But no, it's been it's, we've been working with it for a long time. But the fact that it's a priest, and also the fact that the Catholic Church hushed it up for so long.
It was more taboo in the church than it would be in a family, of course. We would never dream of talking about the parish priest in this way. You might say dad or uncle or grandpa or my funny uncle or something, but
never.
Not the priest.
And of course you've got hell and heaven and all that stuff to hang over a child. You've got the power of not just this life, but this supposed one that follows. So that is, I think that is probably one of the worst scenarios of the priests and ministers of all faiths. Actually, I subscribe to a publication that prints these things up. They come in from all over the country, and they print them up so that you can get an idea. It's pretty vast. It's kind of scary.
It's horrible. Ministers and people you would never dream. Mothers, sometimes. That really amazed me when I found out that mothers will molest their children.
That is.
It's unbelievable.
Really, I know that. It's more men abusing children, isn't it, than women? I mean, what's the ratio?
We don't know the numbers. I don't know the numbers.
I think I've heard like 90% men, 10% women, something like that. I've heard. I don't.
Well, what turns people to this heinous
pedophilia?
Yes. What has anybody figured it out as to?
Well, I don't know. It could be genetic. It could be what's been going on in the family. It's maybe a learned process. It could be an addiction. I don't know. What have you got any
Most
theories
abusers have been abused themselves. So it's a generational thing, generation after generation, and very often, in working with adult survivors, you'll find a woman that was molested, and she will marry a molester.
Wow.
And they're just kind of drawn together.
Exactly.
I mean, I've seen that a lot.
Almost all.
Yeah.
Well, it's like a child of an alcoholic will marry an alcoholic.
Yes.
And say, I will never marry anybody who drinks. And they marry a wonderful young man who doesn't drink, and 10 years down the line he's a drunk. Nobody knows. It's amazing.
Yeah, that's fascinating, isn't it? But when you don't really know how these things come about, how can you ever know how to solve them? I understand. Am I right or wrong? Can molesters be successfully treated?
Yes.
Can?
According to Dr. Stege, do you know Dr. Stege? He says that they can be. And the work that we did at Family Services worked a great deal with the molesters as well. And we were able to turn many of them around. The recidivism is like 4% once you get a hold of them and train them and do, it's a 2-year process.
Well, I would think so, because how could you turn something that awful around in a short time? It would be impossible.
Well, the difficulty in that is because the molester can remain anonymous, can be secret, because it's very difficult for the child or the adult child, the person adult molested as a child, once they're fully cognizant of what went on and exactly what did happen to them, and they're dealing with their own recovery process, they can go back and confront their, the perpetrator, and the perpetrator can deny that anything ever happened so easily. And because our families don't want to believe that happened in the family, mothers don't want to believe that this happened to their daughters and they were present and yet weren't aware of it or didn't stop it. There's so much guilt and shame within the family and within the neighborhood and the community and whatever that it's real easy just to sweep everything back under the rug and let's just don't talk about it. So the survivor ends up having to work through a recovery process with very little support coming from anywhere else. And because the survivor's memories and the emotional trauma that they went through was as a child, it's very hard for the adult person to recover, because as an adult person, you understand and intellectualize what happened and you can work through preparing yourself, but you're still dealing with the pain as a child.
As a child. That would be a toughie, wouldn't it? Does this cause this type of abuse? I saw a movie, Sybil. Did you see
ages ago.
I'm sure it's old. I just finally got it. I take things wildly, and then about 10 years down the line, I show them. So I'm about 250 behind of what I'm got on hand. But I was wondering, is that, now she was very unusual, and she had so many personalities, but is this a multiple personality thing, is it apt to come from abuse, sexual abuse?
Certainly is a place where it would start, especially in the satanic, you've heard of the babies who are used in satanic rituals. And those kids, if they live, generally speaking, are really multiple personalities. Deborah pointed out one time that there's a continuum of multiple personalities, where you have, it's kind of light, and maybe they'll come out every once in a while, and then you have the personality that keeps splitting into all of the parts, and they don't even know that they're doing what they're doing. So I would say that, it's very likely that somebody who is abused as a child splits. That's one of the things they do very well. They split.
It's a coping mechanism that they use to get away from the abuse.
Then when you're treating these people, is it difficult to get all of these? They have to be introduced to themselves in a way, wouldn't they?
Yeah, but it's a small portion of people that are multiple, and the last thing we'd want to do here is suggest that everybody that has been abused is a multiple personality. So I mean that should be made clear right away.
Yeah.
So that's a small portion of the people that we see, but it is it is possible. The majority of the people I see come in about 30 to 40 years old. They've put it behind them, so they think. They've had some children. Maybe their daughter is the same age they were, and all of a sudden, all this stuff starts coming up. Maybe they're having sexual problems in their marriage. Maybe they've just gotten divorced. But all of a sudden, between 30 and 40, that's, about when I see it, then it just comes up for them, and they don't know why. Sometimes they come in and they don't remember. They just have these real vague, bad feelings. And so, because they've worked so hard to suppress the memories,
They're horribly depressed, and they're crying all the time, and they don't know why, and they don't know why they're having relationship problems and bad dreams, and they don't know why. And then all of a sudden the flashbacks may come.
I think for years, in my own experience, there was a vague awareness that something's just not right. Something, I know something happened to me. I know there's something that makes me fearful. Some of the symptoms I think that I share with other adults molested as children are a fear of authority figures, an inability to trust easily, difficulty in relationships. And I think for many of us, we go quite wonderfully through our lives. We do have excellent coping skills because we've been through the most traumatic and fearful events that anyone could endure and endured them. We are survivors. So very often we're wonderful in a crisis and, can handle things very well. Very often we're good at dealing with a lot of things at once. We can go into chaotic situations and stay with a cool head. So there's some wonderful qualities that come out of those coping skills. And I think that for many of us, we go on year after year with just this unsettled stuff down there, and we don't know really what it was about. For me, my memories were occluded till about 2 years ago, and then quite suddenly, uninvited, some memories, flashbacks began to come up, and it in a way made sense because it gave me a way of understanding, so there is something that happened to me. I'm not just cuckoo. There is some reason why I have these fears. And so it was a relief in a way, but also a very fearful process to start examining those things and to make the choice to examine them and make the choice to work through a recovery process rather than just putting it all down again and pretending it didn't happen.
Well, is this recovery, is it then sort of an ongoing thing, or does it have a conclusion as far as counseling goes? I mean, is there any kind of...
Well, that's a good question. It can go on forever, but I think Deborah has done a lot of the good things. She journaled. She has a group. She comes to therapy. She wrote letters. She did all of the right things, and so I think it's coming together. But even so, it's been, what, a couple of years that when you first started to notice something, what was going on, and so it can last that long. And I'm not. The prognosis is pretty good.
Yes,
if they do the stuff they're supposed to do, sure.
And to me, the really great thing about working with adult survivors is they are survivors and they want to get well. I mean, you know, we see a lot of people that come in and they, you know, they don't really have this desire to get well, I feel. But I mean, these people are great to work with because they really want to get well. And once they get beyond that step of really wanting to know what happened, you know, then they just blossom once they get into therapy and start. And so many people, they're so ashamed. The shame is just so intense, you know. And one of the things that I wanted to point out was the guilt that they feel and the shame because maybe it felt good. You know, and our bodies were made in such a way that if you touch the right things, it's going to feel good no matter what, no matter who does it, no matter how wrong it is. The body is designed that way, like a computer. And they can't integrate that. You know, they feel responsible because it felt good and therefore I'm bad.
Yeah, I can see that would really split a person right there,
Very
whether it split their personality, it would have a
So it's real
definite,
hard for them to get beyond that, and if they ever get beyond that, then they're home.
The most damaging thing that I think occurs for people who were abused as children is not always the burden is put back on this child, or at whatever age they're dealing with their memories. Why didn't you tell someone? You know, why didn't you say no? Why didn't you do something about it? You know, so the victim is then held responsible and accountable for what happened, that they somehow could have stopped it. But when you think back to a child, we all want to believe that some horrible, mean person kidnapped this lovely, innocent child and did something mean to them, and that's what happened. But too often it's the person that child loved the most, trusted the most, depended on the most, and respected the most. The ultimate authority figure in your life is daddy or mother, and the person that you are completely dependent on for your survival as a child is that person. And a child isn't innocent. A child does not have the sexual maturity to know this is a good thing, this is a bad thing, this is the right touch, this is the wrong touch. A child doesn't know that. What child doesn't want to be hugged and cuddled and caressed by their parent, and to be praised by their parent, and to, you know, do what the parent wants them to do? And so it's real confusing for the child, and then later to have this foisted back on them. You should have done something about it. You should have known. You should have told.
But how many children have told and then they have not been believed? Absolute heavens! You've got an adult saying, "Oh, well, you're out of your mind. That kid's been watching too much television or something. You've got some crazy idea."
And very often the child does not have. If it's a very young child, like I was. You don't have the vocabulary to explain to someone what happened to you. It's a completely unknown experience, or it's an experience that occurred over and over again that you don't know doesn't happen to every person. And you don't have that objectivity to say this is something unusual.
But one thing that amazes me is that it doesn't take much. In some instances, it really doesn't take a lot. It doesn't take sexual intercourse. It may take an uncle exposing himself, and that ruins them forever. It's amazing to me. But that's on one end of the spectrum, of course. And some people are terribly influenced by that.
Right. Wow.
Yeah, the acts are not necessarily violent acts. You know, they're very confusing.
Well, this exposure thing, now I have read that there's very little cure on that. That's a compulsion that just never seems to be reached, or unless something is developed. Are things better along that?
Sexual perversions can be helped. I don't know what do you know the numbers on that?
No, I don't know.
I really don't know what the numbers are.
The flasher syndrome is the one that seems to be.
But I also believe that it's sort of like an addiction. You know,
it's the same kind of.
That one has always puzzled the hell out of me. I just can't understand it.
Well, it's a thrill. I mean,
scaring somebody out of their gourd or making them.
I think that it's an addiction to the thrill of doing it, the thrill of. I mean, and I don't think it's necessarily about sex.
Has nothing to do with sex.
Or anything like that. It's just about the rush. the rush that you get is, like
doing something
doing
dangerous.
cocaine or something. It's the rush that becomes addictive.
Well, do those people, do they abuse as well, or are they just flashers? I've always heard that
They may.
They may. Yeah. I don't know. They seem to be isolated somewhere, and things I've read that was their thing, and that's what they stuck with, and they never drifted over into anything else.
Well, what happens very often is they start that way, and then it gets worse and worse and worse and worse.
Okay, they're not getting the thrill that way. They've got to look for something else. I see that you have a whole bunch of books there, and I'd like you at least to tell us about some of them.
These are some things that helped me a lot, and I had many more, but I knew there wouldn't be time to show them all. The work that John Bradshaw has done, John Bradshaw and the Family, Homecoming is Reclaiming Your Inner Child, and he was here this past winter with a wonderful conference here in San Antonio, and I think that all of his work and his videos are very helpful in just helping the adult survivor get in touch with that child and what it was like for that child, and to let go of some of the shame and to start dealing with being that inner child's champion and seeing just how far you've come, how those coping skills are working for you. Another book that I wanted to show, this is Strong in the Broken Places by Linda Sanford, and I particularly liked this one because what it points out is because we hear statistics about many abusers were also abused, that sometimes we began to put on that the converse, that everyone who was abused is going to grow up to be an abuser. Not true. And so this book points that out, that there's a wide cross-section from all genders, all ethnics, all social levels, economic levels, and just how the coping skills of the survivor have served people in their adult life to their advantage and developed character and values and principles and compassion. The Right to Innocence is by Beverly Engel, and this is Healing the Trauma of Childhood Sexual Abuse. And this talks about how the survivor was robbed of their innocence, and how the loss of innocence is something that must be grieved in the adult survivor, and it's a very helpful book. I think the workbook, this is the workbook of all times, The Courage to Heal by Ellen Bass and Laura Davis. I found this tremendously helpful. It's a difficult book to read because it is it's graphic. It gets right to the point of what people deal with. They also have a workbook where someone can do their own self-help, their own recovery work by going through it. But it points out the life histories and many survivors themselves, how they felt, how they dealt with things, what they've learned, what they're able to understand now about what they've gone through. Tremendous book, and it helped open my eyes a lot that I'm not alone. There are other people out there going through the same kinds of difficulties that I've gone through. So I recommend this one.
Debbie and I were talking the other day about how do we put that? We said, what do you think about people who come out of therapy and they're feeling pretty good, and would you say that they're even better people than they're better than better people? She said, yeah, I think that's pretty good. Better than better. She thought that was pretty good. She liked that. But I think it's true. That suffering is well conducive to making you a pretty insightful person.
Yeah, well, I think even if not brought up because of suffering, but even a person who will go into introspection and so forth, I think everybody needs to go back and examine things that happened to them younger, because I know that there have been scads of things that just weren't in the wrong time. I was at the wrong place in the wrong time, and I wasn't old enough to really cope with them. So later on down the line, looking back at, just for instance, tragedies, sorrows, big impacts in your early life, before you're old enough to really be able to absorb it. You led a fairly protected life, and then wham, something awful happens, and it's hard to deal with. So I can appreciate that, saying yes, it makes you better. You had to go back and meet yourself as a child and sort of carry yourself on all the way up to the current and learn parenting skills for yourself. And it's so there is help for people out there, and we have 2 people who vouch for that and say they have a pretty good success rate. You do on your
I think so.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
That's very encouraging, because they shouldn't be the ones that don't get better and get all right. That the victim shouldn't be the one that, if you can't do anything with the others but put them away, then I guess that's the way it has to be. But I just wonder about some of these people. They're so sick, and I just wonder if they're born that way. I mean, that is there such a thing as a bad seed, is what I'm trying to ask.
John Bradshaw says inside of everybody is a wounded child. Everybody has been wounded in some way or another. And so I guess with the coping skills, some can cope a whole lot better than others. And others just say, well, that's what I learned, I guess that's what I'll do. I don't know. But the theories are, many theories.
Of course, as we're learning about things, you're bound to advance certain ideas and hypotheses, if you will. And then later on, as more cases come to your attention, you get further into it. It's always a learning process, whatever. But
I believe that anyone can recover, the abuser and the survivor. And it's not about being a victim for the rest of your life. It's about claiming personal responsibility and realizing where you are in life, what kind of quality you want in your life, and how the things that happen to you have impacted you, positively and negatively, and working with those to achieve a balance. And just deciding, I want the best quality of life I can have, and I'm going to do whatever it takes to make that happen for myself and for others. And I think that people who do that, do the soul searching, who go through the introspection, who work on their own life and look at it and say, how can I make it better? How can I be my full potential? I think they have a greater capacity for patience and understanding and forgiveness than others do. And I think they have a greater capacity for dealing with difficult situations in many cases than others do. So it's not about being a victim and always being, oh, woe is me, and isn't it awful? We do have to acknowledge that we were victims.
It was awful.
But now let's move on. Now let's claim our right to our lives back and be personally responsible for improving it. Seeking out a support group, seeking out support from friends and family. Sometimes it's there, sometimes not. Personal counseling, keeping a journal is very helpful. Just becoming better informed, reading books on the subject helps a lot.
It's wonderful to come to this point, where I know all that stuff. I'm okay. I'm going to move on and do other things. It's not that easy.
No, it's a very difficult process. The key is being able to talk about it. Begin somewhere, either acknowledging it to yourself or to a close friend, a family member, then moving on from there.
To that point. As I say, there's so much on the talk shows, but so much of it is just talk. It doesn't really address the sensitivity of things or the deep feelings. It's just talk. They've made so much of, it's just hype, a lot of it, which is unfortunate, I think. But I would hope that that this will, now that we're into this age of disclosure and we can talk about these things, that things will start getting better and we'll have better recovery rate for people who have suffered this terrible abuse. Well, I want to thank you all again for coming, and I hope we can do this again sometime. I think we just barely scratched the surface, and I'm going to get some of those books and read up on them, so I can maybe have more questions to ask too. And how do you feel about what everybody has written in there, and how whether you found it really. You recommend those things as well?
Oh, too, yes, right? And there are many more, too.
Oh, good. Well, as we say, it's a wrap. So, goodbye from Freethought Forum. Hope you tune in again.
As I please, and this gives me pleasure.
My conscience decrees, this right I must treasure.
My thoughts will not cater
to duke or dictator, no person can deny. Die Gedanken sind frei, no person can deny. Die Gedanken sind frei. And should tyrants take me and throw me in prison, my thoughts will burst free like blossoms in sea.